Hey there everyone, welcome back to FMA. Today, we'll be breaking down episodes 5, 6, 7, and 8 of the series. These episodes make up the Lab 5 arc of FMA. There's really no preliminary information for these episodes, so let's just hop straight into episode 5, Hidden Truths. This episode features a pretty even split of O3 and Broho, with most 2003 scenes being used to give Maria Ross more characterization. While these scenes are either different or outright aren't in the manga, I think their presence will pay off nicely in Brotherhood once she's framed for Hughes' murder later on. It also just makes her a more dynamic character compared with Mangahood and allows for one of my favorite scenes with Hughes from any version. Aside from this use of 2003 exclusive characterization, this episode has received no changes beside the usual title card, so let's move on to the next episode, Laboratory 5. This one is very similar to the previous, with the only changes to the Brotherhood episode being in service of Ross and Hughes' characterization, as well as FMABR's only major cut from either version, the Creative Memories plotline. Lowart went into more detail on just how poorly Barry as a character is handled in all three versions of FMA, with 2003 being the most egregious thanks to that filler episode. Barry is a serial killer after all, he should have a little more weight beyond just being comic relief. Nonetheless, he is important to early Mangahood's story, so rather than cutting him altogether, I decided to just remove the dialogue he has with Al about Creative Memories. This does make the next episode quite short, but I think it will be worth it to remove what amounts to filler in the grand scheme of things. Beyond this added characterization and removal of some Barry dialogue, this episode is almost a straight retelling of the Brotherhood version once we get to Laboratory 5 itself, bringing us to episode 7, unofficially titled Aftermath. I say unofficially since this episode doesn't actually include a title card. Creative Memories is no longer a fitting episode title, so for now this episode just won't have one. If anyone is interested in creating a new version of this title card for this episode, let me know and I'll be sure to include it in a new revision. Anyways, this episode is really short, having a runtime of only 13 minutes and 45 seconds. Nonetheless, I figured these scenes with Ross, Hughes, and Wintry were still worth handing their own episode, even if it does end up on the shorter side of things. This episode also has a pretty solid split of 2003 and Brotherhood, notably having a break between the two condensed episode halves around the 1/3 mark. I also cut off this exchange early, as similar to the Creative Memories plotline I always considered it an awkward inclusion that feels especially off to me considering the circumstances. There's not much else to this one outside of the after credits scene, so let's move on to one of, if not the most important episode of FMABR, Separate Destinations. Okay, so the death of Mace Hughes is one of the most important elements of every incarnation of FMA, but it's worth noting that 2003 Hughes and Mangahood Hughes serve somewhat different purposes in their stories. 2003 Hughes is a leading character whose death is given a unique sense of weight. It gives this sense of finality to the character's place in the story. While his death is no less tragic, his role in 2003's story feels complete when looking at how future events play out. He's a character who feels as if he fulfilled his role. Mangahood contrasts this almost completely, as Hughes felt like a character who could have been more pivotal to the story given the chance. He was also a character who seemed as if he was meant to be more involved in greater events, until his life, and by extension his role in the story, were cut short. His role was intentionally made unfulfilled. That's what makes Mustang's fervent hunt for Hughes' killer so endearing in Mangahood. And yet that investigation is given much less weight in 2003 by comparison, and never fully pays off for Mustang. This isn't to say that either is poorly handled, there are obvious strengths to both, but we'll be using the manga standard as that's the version of events FMABR is trying to adapt, at least in the grand scheme of things. Even still, I think this episode manages to take the best elements from both of these individual versions of events to maximize the impact of this new edit. Enough build-up though, let's take a look at that timeline. Overall, this episode hasn't received much in terms of editing in spite of what I said. It actually starts with a lot of unedited Brotherhood and stays that way up until this scene near the end. While these paralleled scenes aren't bad in Brotherhood per se, 2003 scenes here just knock it out of the park with almost every detail. Except for the shot. Yeah, I don't really know why, but 2003 seemed to have a problem with lips in their designs that was especially uncanny here, so I took it out and used this shot instead. After that, we move to this dialogue as the episode draws to a close. As a side note, this version of the credits gets to take on a special new meaning with FMABR. The track that plays before the normal ending is 2003's Theme of a Mistress. This track gets a special degree of finality this time though, as this is the last time it will ever play in FMABR. Helping as well is that the Brotherhood ending theme, in my opinion anyway, fits much better than the 2003 ending theme that plays here in the original, further strengthening this ending. Outside of these aforementioned details coming together great, there really isn't much to this episode. It's just a straight combination of the best elements of both versions of events. See you guys next time on FMABR, where we'll look at Rush Valley and the entire Dublin arc. See you then.